Hey crew, it's Pitt, and I'm back with some more Esoterica. Today we are going to be diving back into the works of Mrs. Helena Blavatsky. This is The Secret Doctrine. We are reading aloud and discussing as we go along the various points that are brought to light by the text. It's not the format for everyone, but some people find value in it, so you are more than welcome to tag along as we continue our exploration. Before we begin, however, if you are unfamiliar with me, any of my unconventional beliefs, or if at any point in time I lose you in terminology, there will be several playlists linked in the corner above, in the box down below, along with the original source material, so that you can get a better understanding of who I am and why I say the things that I do. With that being said, let us dive in and continue our exploration of the secret doctrine with scientific and esoteric evidence for and objections to the modern nebular theory. Of late, esoteric cosmogony has been frequently opposed by the phantom of this theory and its ensuing hypotheses. Can this most scientific teaching be denied by your adepts? It is asked. Not entirely, is the reply, but the admissions of the men of science themselves kill it, and there is nothing for the adepts to deny. To make of science an integral whole necessitates, indeed, the study of spiritual and psychic as well as physical nature. Otherwise, it will ever be like the anatomy of man, discussed of old by the profane from the point of view of his shell side and in ignorance of the interior work. Even Plato, the greatest philosopher of his country, became guilty, before his initiation, of such statements as that liquids pass into the stomach through the lungs. Without metaphysics, as Mr. H.J. Slack says, real science is inadmissible. Okay, two deals right here. First off, we have dealt with several of the works of Plato. If you're interested in that type of thing, it is contained in the Ancient Lore playlist, as well as its own standalone playlist for Plato and the works of Socrates, or Socrates and the works of Plato. Second off, this was not like metaphysics has absolutely nothing to do with the fact that you don't pass liquids through your lungs before it gets to your stomach. That I don't understand how this correlation was even conceived of, right? The greatest philosopher of his country became guilty of such statements as that liquids pass into the stomach through the lungs. Okay, so he didn't do an autopsy, and nobody else had done an autopsy either, so people did not understand the actual physicality of how the digestive system works. That's not a big deal, but it's not explained by metaphysics. It is not explained by metaphysics at all that there is a diversion between the oxygen you breathe and the liquids that you drink. That is not explained by metaphysics. That is explained by actual physics. That is explained by actual science. That is explained through trial and error. It is not something that you have to have some conception of in order for it to work, right? So this right here, without metaphysics, real science is inadmissible, is stupid. It is stupid. Does that mean that there is no metaphysics involved in anything? No. Does that mean that we would not have a greater understanding taking metaphysics into the understanding of physics? No. But what it means, or yes, we would have a better understanding if we took in metaphysics. But it doesn't mean that the physical thing actually changed because somebody said something, right? It doesn't mean that if it wasn't for metaphysics, we never would have discovered that there's a way for like a little switch inside your throat that switches between oxygen and food and liquid. Like that's not tied together. You don't have to have metaphysics to understand that swallowing is different than breathing, right? You don't have to it doesn't require you to believe in God even to understand that that is something that happens. And so this right here is this is wildness. Like, I do not even understand how this got put in here, right? What is the relevance of this? There is no relevance to this statement at all, except to poison the well, right? If you're going to argue from a fallacious standpoint, then poisoning the well is going to give you a firmer leg to stand on in your estimation. It's not really a firm leg. All right, back to the text. The nebulae exist, yet the nebular theory is wrong. A nebula exists in a state of entire elemental dissociation. It is gaseous and something else besides, which can hardly be connected with gases, as known to physical science, and it is self-luminous. Okay, and once again, we have the lens of history, right? We have superior technology. We have the ability to peer farther out into space than anyone has ever done before. We have the electron microscope. We can actually look at atoms, elemental atoms. We can actually look at that. We can actually see it, right? We know what's going on. The gas is still a solid. It is just a solid in disassociation. You can take and create dry ice from nitrogen. Nitrogen is a gas. It is floating around you right now. And if you compress it to a certain amount, you get a liquid. And then if you compress it some more, you get a solid. Gas has weight. Gas has volume. Gas is when I do this, there is a resistance against my hand. We are so accustomed to that resistance that we don't even recognize it. But there are 32 millibars of pressure pushing down on you right now if you're at sea level. And these are things that we know. There is no doubt about these particular points. We can argue about all kinds of other things, but there is mass associated with a gas, right? And so it is not entire elemental dissociation. As a matter of fact, some of those gases out there, they are compound elements. There's water floating around out there, and that is not a single element, right? That is hydrogen times 2 and an oxygen, H2O. And so that is elemental association, not dissociation. There's carbon monoxide and carbon dioxide and all kinds of other elemental combinations in the nebulae. And so it is not elemental dissociation. Straight off the top, you're wrong. Not necessarily nebular theory. Now, that is not to say that our understanding of how the nebulae turned into planets is correct or full. That is not saying that. What it is saying is that your assumption here is wrong, like fundamentally incorrect. And I've got serious doubts whether this gets cleared up, right? We started with poisoning the well, and now we are just talking about something that we do not have an understanding of. And yes, I know we have the lens of history to look back on. We are in a better place now. We have a firmer grasp on science. This is why it is so important to maintain speculation to speculation and fact is fact, right? Those two have to remain separate, even if you are really close to your speculation being fact. Sometimes you're wrong. Sometimes I'm wrong. Sometimes everybody's wrong. And so if you are only speculating, keep it in the realm of speculation. Don't say, well, this is absolutely certain, right? A nebula exists in a state of entire elemental dissociation is an incorrect statement. And you did not even have enough knowledge to make this incorrect statement. You didn't have the understanding. You didn't have the raw material to work with, the formulated hypotheses. You didn't have that. You were just pulling something out of your ass because it fit with your doctrine that you wanted it to fit with. That is a problem. Also, it's not self-luminous. It is illuminated by something else. There is an energetic transfer happening in every single light source. That means that there is a power coming from somewheres. It is most probably not self-generated. Now, that light source can be coming from the connection of these elements. That is the thing. Ionic bonds happen. And when they happen, there is an exchange of heat. Every single time. And that exchange of heat sometimes manifests itself as flashes of light. You see that in lightning. And so, once again, this is an incorrect statement. We are not very far into today, and there's a whole lot to give questions about so far. Back to the text. All right. Can hardly be connected with gases as known to physical science, and it is self-luminous. But that is all. The 62 coincidences enumerated by Professor Stephen Alexander. Footnote, Smithsonian Contributions. confirming the nebular theory may all be explained by esoteric science, though, as this is not an astronomical work, the refutations are not attempted at present. Yeah, that's why. That's why, because it's not an astronomical work. That's why your refutations are not attempted. I'm sure that's what's going on right there. Laplace and Fay come nearer to the correct theory than any, but the speculations of Laplace, there remains little in the present theory except its general features. Nevertheless, there is in Laplace's theory, says John Stuart Mill, nothing hypothetical. It is an example of legitimate reasoning from present effect to its past cause. It assumes nothing more than that objects which really exist obey the laws which are known to be obeyed by all terrestrial objects resembling them. System of logic. Now, I am not familiar with Laplace and Fay, right? There are several of the scientists that I am familiar with the effects of their work and not necessarily their name, right? So I may be familiar with what Laplace and Fay speculated upon without knowing their names. That's one of the problems, not really a problem, with science, right? Sometimes all you know is the person's name, right? Try to get somebody to explain to you what Einstein's theory of relativity is. They are much more familiar with Einstein than they are with the theory of relativity, even though that is taught in every school, and even though that is not entirely a correct formulation, right? More people are familiar with that because he's famous. So, I don't know Laplace's theory. I don't know Fay's theory. I don't know any of that. And so I just have to go off of what is known science these days. And it has been observed through the various telescopes that we have sent into space since 1888 that these things actually do perform in the manner that is being described here. They do really exist. They do obey the laws which are known to be obeyed by all terrestrial objects. We do not have, as far as I am aware, any evidence leading to anything defying the laws that we identify here, right? Now, with the exception of relativity as an extreme example of not understanding fully the law, right? You can travel faster than light. We probably won't be able to do it as humans, but the ability to travel faster than the speed of light is a thing, even if it is a almost impossible to achieve thing, right? If light has mass, that means that it is moving at a speed slower than terminal velocity, where it would burn away. If this mass has electrons, right, and you have, or it has a nucleus and electrons surrounding it, which is probable, if not proven, that nucleus is running forward in space at the speed of light. It is moving at the speed of light. And that electron that is going around it for half of the orbit is moving faster than the speed of light. That is a very small way to talk about that concept, right? We don't have good examples of going faster than the speed of light because we have accepted for many years that it is impossible, so nobody's even playing with it. Back to the text. And that I can be wrong in that. That is my speculation, but it is probable. This, from such an eminent logician as Mill was, would be valuable if it could only be proved that terrestrial objects resembling celestial objects at such a distance as the nebulae are, resemble those objects in reality, not alone in appearance. Now, our observations in space are with the caveat that sometimes we don't actually see the things that we think that we do see. Before we had the James Webb Telescope, right? The James Webb Telescope is a fairly new innovation. We have just recently, in the last couple of years, got that into space and started receiving pictures. And what we discovered from that was we had, I cannot remember the name of the telescope we were using before that, even though it was the prime one. And you know what I'm talking about. It's a big telescope we had before James Webb. Anyway, It's pointed out at space, and it took a long exposure shot, and there are lights all across this picture that it took, right? These are nebulae, and they're stars, and they are different clusters of things out in space. And between those is great areas of darkness. With our new telescope, we focused on one of those areas of darkness, and inside of that area of darkness, right, is light. Not just a little bit of light, but a whole lot of light. So we don't always see everything that we think that we see. We thought that that particular area of space was vacant, and it is not. Greater discovery has allowed us greater understanding. That is this problem summed up, right? They couldn't, even then, see nearly as far. Like, I don't want to get into approximations because I'm not sure of exactly the technical distance that they could see in. But until we had the ability to get beyond the atmosphere, we didn't have the capacity to see as well as we do. Once we were able to break through the atmosphere, we were able to see many more things. So we just need to keep in mind that sometimes these are technical limitations and not necessarily misunderstandings by science. They are formulating the best hypotheses that they can. I do not attribute bad intentions to these people. They are formulating the best hypotheses that they can, and sometimes they're wrong, and that is fine. Once you have the information, if you are still formulating the wrong hypotheses with countervening information that is provable, trackable, reproducible, and traceable, then you're doing it wrong. Back to the text. Another of the fallacies from the occult standpoint, which are embodied in the modern theory as it now stands, is the hypotheses that the planets were all detached from the sun, that they are the bone of his bone and the flesh of his flesh, whereas the sun and planets are only co-uterine brothers, having had the same nebular origin, only in a different mode from that postulated by modern astronomy. I am not sure where the actual science on this sits today. It has fluctuated several times over the last few decades. What is being said here, right? The distinction between these two theories is that the sun became, and then from the sun spat out the planets, and contrary to that, the sun developed, and then Mercury developed outside of the sun from different nebular material, and then Venus, and then Earth. Not necessarily in that order or in that magnitude, but that's the general theory. And so I'm not sure where we are now. I think we are closer to the not coming directly from the sun, right? Different accretions from different areas in space. That would explain a lot of the lack in the elementals in different places, like we talked about yesterday with the sun, and everybody's like, well, the sun is hydrogen. It's like almost entirely hydrogen. That is, according to gravity, not really how it's going to work, right? That's not to say that there can't be hydrogen on the sun, but if it is the point in our solar system which has the densest mass, which is the hypotheses, then it is going to attract the heaviest substances to it first, and the lighter ones are going to stay out. You will have gas giants way out here, but you're going to have a solid chunk of rock here, or metal, more likely than rock even, right? The heavier metals even, rather than the lighter metals. And so it is not solid hypotheses, in my estimation, to say that the sun is going to be made up of entirely helium or hydrogen, right? Even mostly, the physicality of sedimentary science will not support that. There's a reason why the Earth is encapsulated by water and then encapsulated by air on top of that. It is because of density, right? That is a real thing. There's a reason why we postulate that the core of the Earth is iron. It's because of density and the gravitational forces pulling the heaviest things to the center. That's kind of how we understand physics to work. Back to the text. The many objections raised against the homogeneity of the original diffuse matter on the ground of the uniformity in the composition of the fixed stars by some opponents of the modern nebular theory do not affect the question of that homogeneity at all, but only the said theory. They were not homogeneous. Helium, hydrogen, oxygen, nitrogen, carbon, all of the elements are different. They can form molecular bonds and create compounds, but they're all different and differentiated in themselves. There was no point in time where oxygen was actually hydrogen, right? And then the differentiation happened and it picked up extra ions and became oxygen. That's not how it really works, right? That the stars are all the same component. We just talked about that. That is almost certainly not true in every single instance. And so, once again, we have a misunderstanding which we can correct through the length of time. Our solar nebula may not be completely homogeneous, or rather, it may fail to reveal itself as such to the astronomers, and yet be de facto homogeneous. See, once again, this is a fallacy, right? You are arguing something that is not, simply because you believe that it is true. The stars do differ in their constituent materials and even exhibit elements quite unknown on Earth. That is not true, right? As far as I am aware, there's only like 2 elements that we have not been able to reproduce and only been able to theoretically assume. Everything else we have here, right? And those are due to circumstances that are extreme. And so, yes, there might be stars that are composed of something that is not on Earth, but it is extremely unlikely. The stars do differ in their constituent materials and even exhibit elements quite unknown on Earth. Nevertheless, this does not affect the point that primeval matter, an example, as it appeared even in its first differentiation from its Laya condition, footnote, beyond the zero line of action, which would be stasis. It is yet, to this day, homogeneous at immense distances in the depths of infinitude, and likewise at points not far removed from the outskirts of our solar system. That is not true. That is an assumption, right? They didn't have the capacity to even launch a rocket, right? That didn't happen for another, 50 years after this? Flight had not happened yet. The internal combustion engine was a brand new concept. And so many of the things that have led to our technological advances were not available. There is no point anywheres, right? Even in like this ring, right? My wedding ring right here. This is 24 karat gold. That is not pure gold. It is close to pure. There is nothing really pure, right? To the extent that in nature, nothing exists in a pure form. Not that you cannot refine gold into a pure form. But even then, it is going to contain trace elements that are outside of AU. And so, this is an assumption that she is making based upon her spiritual beliefs, right? I believe that this Laya condition existed, and therefore, in order to make things accord with my belief, I am going to state things that are not true, right? That we don't have an understanding of, right? I don't have a problem with hypotheses. I don't have a problem with speculation. You can speculate about anything that you want. As long as you are clear, I may even agree with you. But to say that something that you don't have any information about is actually true simply because you want it to be, that does not work for me in any instance whatsoever. Back to the text. We are not far into this. Finally, there does not exist one single fact brought forward by the learned objectors against the nebular theory, false as it is, and hence, illogically enough, fatal to the hypothesis of the homogeneity of matter, that can withstand criticism. One error leads into another. A false premise will naturally lead to a false conclusion. You should tell yourself that one. A false premise will naturally lead to a false conclusion, although an inadmissible inference does not necessarily affect the validity of the major proposition of the syllogism. Thus, one may leave every side issue and inference from the evidence of spectra and lines as simply provisional for the present, and abandon all matters of detail to physical science. The duty of the occultist lies with the soul and spirit of cosmic space, not merely with its elusive appearance and behavior. That of official physical science is to analyze and study its shell, the ultima thule of the universe and man, in the opinion of materialism. With the latter, occultism has naught to do. It is only with the theories of such men of learning as Kepler, Kant, Oersted, and Sir W. Herschel, who believed in a spiritual world, that occult cosmogony might treat and attempt a satisfactory compromise. But the views of those physicists differed vastly from the latest modern speculations. Kant and Herschel had in their mind's eye speculations upon the origin and the final destiny, as well as the present aspect of the universe, from a far more philosophical and psychic standpoint, whereas modern cosmology and astronomy now repudiate anything like research into the mysteries of being. The result is what might be expected: complete failure and inextricable contradictions in the 1,001 varieties of so-called scientific theories, and in this theory as in all others. The nebular hypotheses involving the theory of the existence of a primeval matter diffused in a nebulous condition is of no modern date in astronomy, as everyone knows. Anaximenes of the Ionian school had already taught that the sidereal bodies were formed through the progressive condensation of a primordial pregenetic matter, which had almost a negative weight and was spread out through space in an extremely sublimated condition. That was thought, right? That was not proven. That was speculation, and incorrect speculation. Tycho Brahe, who viewed the Milky Way as an ethereal substance, thought the new star that appeared in Cassiopeia in 1572 had been formed out of that matter. Progymnasmata. Kepler believed that the star of 1606 had been likewise formed out of the ethereal substance that fills the universe. De Stella Novae in Pede Septentari. He attributed to that same ether the apparition of a luminous ring around the moon during the total eclipse of the sun observed at Naples in 1605. Hypotheses cosmogoniques. Still later, in 1714, the existence of a self-luminous matter was recognized by Halley. Finally, the journal of this name was published in 1811. The famous hypotheses on the transformation of the nebulae into stars by the eminent astronomer Sir W. Herschel. See Philosophical Transactions of 1811. After which the nebular theory was accepted by the Royal Academies. In 5 Years of Theosophy, on page 245, an article headed, "Do the adepts deny the nebular theory?" may be read. The answer there given is no. They do not deny its general propositions, nor the approximative truth of the scientific hypotheses. They only deny the completeness of the present, as well as the error of the many so-called exploded old theories, which during the last century have followed each other in such rapid succession. This was proclaimed at the time an evasive answer. Such disrespect to official science, it was argued, must be justified by the presentation, to replace the orthodox speculation of another theory more complete than theirs and having a firmer ground to stand upon. Yes, you must, if you are going to say this is not true, have evidence to back up that this is not true and instead this is. That is something that needs to be said. Now, you can speculate that it's not true and you don't have to provide that proof. But if you state that it is true, then you must. To this, there is but one reply. It is useless to give out isolated theories with regard to things embodied in a whole and consecutive system, which, when separated from the main body of the teaching, would necessarily lose their vital coherence and thus do no good when studied independently. That is patently untrue. What? I'm not enjoying this one today at all. To be able to appreciate and accept the occult views on the nebular theory, one has to study the whole esoteric cosmogonical system. At the time, and the time has hardly arrived for the astronomers to be asked to accept Fohat and the divine builders. Even the undeniably correct surmises of Sir W. Herschel, that had nothing supernatural in them, about the sun being called globe of fire, perhaps metaphorically, and his early speculations about the nature of that which is now called the Naismith willow leaf theory, caused that most eminent of all astronomers to be smiled at by other far less eminent colleagues, who saw and now see in his ideas only imaginative and fanciful theories. Before the whole esoteric system could be given out and appreciated by the astronomers, they would have to return to some of those antiquated ideas. Not only to those of Herschel, but to the dreams of the oldest Hindu astronomers, and to abandon their own theories, none the less fanciful, because they have appeared in one case nearly 80 years, and the other many thousands of years later. Foremost of all, they would have to repudiate the idea on the sun's solidity and incandescence. The sun glowing, most undeniably, but not burning. Then, it is stated with regard to Sir W. Herschel's view that these objects, as he called the willow leaves, are the immediate source of the solar light and heat. What he is talking about is the corona surrounding the sun. It is visible, right? You can do experiments and see for yourself sunspots. You can do experiments and see for yourself the filaments that are attached to the sun. That is what he was calling willow leaves, because we didn't have the ability to see in the way that we do now, right? We have the lens of history to look back through. We have the lens of technology to look back through, and now we understand what he was talking about. And I repudiate the incandescence, right? I repudiate as speculation fully that the sun is burning, right? I believe that it is a conduit of power from elsewhere. Just like the lightning bolt does not generate the actual lightning, it is a visible sign of something else that is happening. The sun emanates energy. That is a guarantee. Where that energy comes from is less of a guarantee. Some people speculate that it is fusion. Some people speculate that it is fission. Some people speculate that there is a fire burning in space. I speculate that it is like a light bulb. There is an electrical current coming from somewhere else that hits the filament, which would be incandescent. It hits the filament and it creates the luminosity, right? This is an outpouring of energy from somewhere else. That is my theory. That is my speculation. But it goes in line with the actual science that we have. And though the esoteric teaching does not regard these as he did, namely organisms, as partaking of the nature of life, for the solar beings will hardly place themselves within telescopic focus, yet it asserts that the whole universe is full of such organisms, conscious and active according to the proximity or distance of their planes to or from our plane of consciousness, and that finally the great astronomer was right in saying, "We do not know that vital action is competent to develop at once heat, light, and electricity," while speculating on those supposed organisms. For, at the risk of being laughed at by the whole world of physicists, the occultists maintain that all the forces of the scientists have their origin in the vital principle, the one life collectively of our solar system, that life being a portion, or rather one of the aspects, of the one universal life. Now this last part I don't disagree with. I believe that life is much greater than our solar system, right? That our solar system acts as its own unit, but that it is part of a bigger unit. That all of existence is acting in accordance with all of existence all at the same time. And so I do not disagree with this. We may, therefore, as in the article under consideration, wherein, on the authority of the adepts, it was maintained that it is sufficient to make a resume of what the solar physicists do not know, we maintain, define our position with regards to the modern nebular theory and its evident incorrectness by simply pointing out facts diametrically opposed to it in its present form. And to begin with, what does it teach? Now, our current understanding of astrophysics is the nebular theory. It has not changed in the last 150 years in significant degree. And so she is arguing against something that has stood the test of time. Just pointing that out. Summarizing the aforesaid hypotheses, it becomes plain that Laplace's theory, now made quite unrecognizable, moreover, was an unfortunate one. He postulates in the first place that cosmic matter, existing in a state of diffuse nebulosity, so fine that its presence could hardly have been suspected. No attempt is made by him to penetrate into the arcana of being, except as regards the immediate evolution of our small solar system. Consequently, whether one accepts or rejects his theory and its bearing upon the immediate cosmological problems presented for solution, he can only be said to have thrown back the mystery a little further to the eternal query, whence matter itself, whence the evolutionary impetus determining its cyclic aggregations and dissolutions, whence the exquisite symmetry and order into which the primeval atoms arrange and group themselves. No answer is attempted by Laplace. All we are confronted with is a sketch of the probable, broad principles on which the actual process is assumed to be based. Well, and what is this now celebrated note on the said process? What has he given so wonderfully new and original that its groundwork, at any rate, should have served as a basis for the modern nebular theory? This is one gathers from various astronomical works. Laplace thought that, consequent on the condensation of the atoms of the primeval nebula, according to the law of gravity, the now gaseous, or perhaps partially liquid mass, acquired a rotary motion. As the velocity of this rotation increased, it assumed the form of a thin disk. Finally, the centrifugal force, overpowering that of cohesion, huge rings were detached from the edge of the whirling incandescent masses, contracting, never necessarily by gravitation, as accepted, into spheroidal bodies, which would necessarily still continue to preserve the same orbit occupied previously by the outer zone from which they are separated. Laplace conceived that the external and internal zones of the ring would rotate with the same angular velocity, which would be the case with a solid ring, but the principle of equal areas requires the inner zones to rotate more rapidly than the outer. Footnote. World Life, Professor Winchell points out to a good many mistakes of Laplace in his work, but as a geologist, he is not infallible himself in his astronomical speculations. The velocity of the outer edge of each nascent planet, he said, exceeding that of the inner, there results a rotation on its axis. The more dense bodies would be thrown off last, and finally, during the preliminary state of their formation, the newly segregated orbs, in their turn, throw off one or more satellites. In formulating the history of the rupture and planetation of rings, Laplace says, almost always each ring of vapors must have broken up into numerous masses, which, moving with a nearly uniform velocity, must have continued to circulate at the same distance around the sun. These masses must have taken a spheroidal form with a motion of rotation in the same direction as the revolution, since the inner molecules, those nearer to the sun, would have less actual velocity than the exterior ones. They must then have formed as many planets in a state of vapor. But if one of them was sufficiently powerful to unite successively by its attraction all the others around its center, the ring of vapors must have been thus transformed into a single spheroidal mass of vapors circulating around the sun with a rotation in the same direction as its revolution. The latter case has been the more common, but the solar system presents us the first case in the 4 small planets which move between Jupiter and Mars. While few will be found to deny the magnificent audacity of this hypothesis, it is impossible not to recognize the insurmountable difficulties with which it is attended. Why, for instance, do we find that the satellites of Neptune and Uranus display a retrograde motion that, in spite of its closer proximity to the Sun, Venus is less dense than the Earth? Similarly, the more distant Uranus is more dense than Saturn. How is it that so many variations in the inclination of their axes and orbits are present in the supposed progeny of the central orb? That such startling variations in the size of the planets is noticeable? That the satellites of Jupiter are more dense by 0.288 than their primary? That the phenomena of meteoric and cometic systems still remain unaccounted for? Because speculation. There is another model besides the Copernican model, right? The Copernican model is that the Earth revolves around the sun, and that all of the planets in the solar system revolve around the sun. And that's a model that has been useful, but not necessarily correct. There is another model. It is called the Tychos model, Tychos. And it postulates that instead of being centered around the sun, the solar system is actually centered around Saturn. Might be Jupiter. For some reason, I cannot keep that straight. It's probably because I haven't gone back and did a deep dive into the Tychos model. But there are animations available. There are explanations of the hypotheses involved, which explain that it is much more likely that instead of the sun, there was a different point of accumulation. That would explain the weight differences that, like we talked about the sun. If it is the center of all gravity, then how is it so light, right? They suspect that it is hydrogen or helium. How is it that that's where that accumulated in the densest point of the system? Because it's not the densest point of the system. And that makes much more sense, especially going into the geometry that is projected by the computer simulations for the Tychos model. Every one of the planets, instead of having a regular elliptical orbit, actually has an orbit around that more closely matches with sacred geometry and the various things that you get from that. And so, for me, the Tychos model is going to be a better fit than the Copernican model, but I'm not an astrophysicist, right? This is just something I speculate upon. But it would explain this. It would explain these particular questions to a great degree. To quote the master, they, the occultists, find that the centrifugal theory of Western birth is unable to cover all the ground. That, unaided, it can neither account for every oblate spheroid, nor explain away such evident difficulties as are presented by the relative density of some planets. How, indeed, can any calculation of centrifugal force explain to us, for instance, why Mercury, whose rotation is, we are told, only about 1/3 that of the Earth, and its density only about 1/4 greater than the Earth, should have a polar compression more than 10 times as great as the latter? And again, why Jupiter, whose equatorial rotation is said to be 27 times greater, and its density only about 1/5 of that of the Earth's, should have its polar compression 17 times greater than that of the Earth? Or why Saturn, with an equatorial velocity 55 times greater than Mercury for centripetal force to contend with, should have its polar compression only 3 times greater than Mercury's? To crown the above contradictions, we are asked to believe in these central forces, as taught by modern science, even when told that the equatorial matter of the Sun, with more than 4 times the centrifugal velocity of the Earth's equatorial surface, and only about 1/4 part of the gravitation of the equatorial matter, has not manifested any tendency to bulge at the solar equator. Oh, that's funny. Nor shown the least flattening of the poles of the solar axis. All right. Even when told that the equatorial matter of the Sun, with more than 4 times the centrifugal velocity of Earth's equatorial surface, and only 1/4 of the gravitation of the equatorial matter, I'm not sure whether the solar body shows the same ellipse, right? That's what it is. It's ovoid, right? The Earth is not a sphere, it's an ovoid. It is slightly compressed at the north and south pole, and it bulges at the equator. I thought that what she was saying here when I said it was funny, I thought she was saying that the Earth didn't bulge. That was me misreading, so that's why I went back and read it again to make sure before I drove into that. I am unsure whether or not the Sun itself shows that. I'm never really dug into that, so I don't know. In other and clearer words, the Sun, with only 1/4 of our Earth's density for the centrifugal force to work upon, has no polar compression at all. We find this objection made by more than one astronomer, yet never explained away satisfactorily as far as the adepts are aware. Now, I can postulate a theory on this, right? If indeed the Sun is not compressed, and if indeed it is composed of helium, that would make sense. Because the force of mass is what causes the elliptical, right? The ovoid. It is because of the mass being compressed, we spin around the equator, and the bulge comes from that matter trying to move out from the source of gravity for our planet, which is in the center of the Earth, but is probably not iron. But because it is trying to spin away from that, and because it is a solid cohesive mass, it pulls it down. If you don't have solidity, and instead the Sun is in fact a gaseous state, then you wouldn't have that solid mass to pull down, right? The middle would tend to bulge out, but there would be less because the stuff in the middle is not really pushing the stuff on the edge as hard as it does on our planet. That is me postulating a theory on the fly. I could be completely wrong, but it seems like it would work, theoretically at least. Back to the text. Therefore do they, the adepts, say that the great men of science of the West, knowing next to nothing either about cometary matter, centrifugal and centripetal forces, the nature of the nebulae, or the physical constitution of the sun, the stars, or even the moon, are imprudent to speak as confidently as they do about the central mass of the sun, whirling out into space, planets, comets, and whatnot. We maintain that it, the sun, evolves out only the life principle, the soul of those bodies, giving and receiving it back in our solar system as the universal life giver. In infinitude and eternity, that the solar system is as much the microcosm of the one macrocosm as man is the former when compared with his own little solar cosmos. Footnote. 5 years of theosophy. Do the adepts deny the nebular theory? The essential faculty possessed by all the cosmic and terrestrial elements of generating within themselves a regular and harmonious series of results, a concatenation of causes and effects, is an irrefutable proof that they are either animated by an extra or intra intelligence, or conceal such within or behind the manifested veil. That's not true. Right? The essential faculty possessed by all the cosmic and terrestrial elements of generating within themselves a regular and harmonious series of results, a concatenation of causes and effects, is an irrefutable proof that they are either animated by or by an extra or intra intelligence. That is not true. That is simply not true. That is saying that because I throw a ball, that there has to be some force in the ball causing it to rotate. No, the force was me throwing the ball. That makes it rotate in whatever direction my hand spins. That makes it rotate in the according to how hard I throw it. Right? That is basic physics. And so this is not an irrefutable proof that there is an intelligence inside of the baseball. Occultism does not deny the certainty of the mechanical origin of the universe. It only claims the absolute necessity of mechanicians of some sort behind those elements or within, a dogma with us. That is why I am not, right? I am on the spiritual side of things. I even consider myself a spiritualist because I am doing things that she probably couldn't. And yet, I don't need this, right? I don't have to have that there is something inside of every atom that is conscious and intelligent. I even believe, to a small degree, that that is a truth, right? I believe that there is a theory of spiritual evolution, and that goes from the atomic level back up to the macrocosmic level, and that even every atom of hydrogen has its own cohesive self, right? Whether that is a conscious thinking of I am hydrogen, I am oxygen, or whether it is just the innate understanding without the ability of thought, which is a possibility. It is hypotheticals, right? But I don't have to have this dogma that there is this intelligence inside of the atom saying rotate left, rotate left, rotate left, right? Holding the atom and just spinning it, or the sun, or the planet. To me, that is beyond the point of not necessary. Like, beyond that point. I believe that there is something inside of this vessel making the decisions. I believe that I am an ensouled creature, that inside of this physical 5D space, I, the spiritual being, am in here making the decisions, spinning this body. That I believe. It is true for the animals. Yes. It is true in a small part for the plants. I don't know that I agree that it is in the same manner true to the elemental level. And so this is an explanation that is not entirely necessary and mostly just casts doubt into, right? It is not the fortuitous assistance of the atoms of Lucretius, who himself knew better, that built the cosmos and all in it. Nature herself contradicts such a theory. Celestial space, containing matter so attenuated as is ether, cannot be called on, or with or without attraction, to explain the common motion of the sidereal hosts. That is not true. Although the perfect accord of their mutual revolution indicates clearly the presence of a mechanical cause in nature. Newton, who, of all men, had the best right to trust to his deductions and views, was nevertheless forced to abandon the idea of ever explaining, by the laws of known nature and its material forces, the original impulse given to the millions of orbs. He recognized fully the limits that separate the action of natural forces from that of the intelligences that set the immutable laws into order and action. And if a Newton had to renounce such hope, which of the modern materialistic pygmies has the right of saying, "I know better"? Well, in this day and age, most of them. This right here, this is we've seen a few examples of things that could be taken in a racist way, right? We have seen a few examples that if you are looking for it, you could probably be offended by it. This right here is diving deep head first into that, right? This is stereotyping an entire subclass of people as stupid, straight off the top, and adding anybody that disagrees with me to that list. Okay, boss, that's awfully tolerant of you. Materialistic pygmies. Come on, bro. And once again, we will point out that in the 1880s, people had entirely different understandings of humanity, right? But it is funny, extremely fucking funny to me, that somebody who is here expounding to be a spiritual authority is denigrating a class of people and a race. To me, that is funny. Not funny, ha-ha, but funny what the fuck. How can you claim to be spiritually enlightened and make fun of people for immutable characteristics? That's funny to me. To become complete and comprehensible, a cosmogonical theory has to start with a primordial substance diffused throughout boundless space of an intellectual and divine nature. Now, I fully, let me clarify where I stand on that, right? I believe that there is an intelligence. I believe that there is a God. It is not necessarily what we conceive of, like some sky daddy sitting on a chair waiting for you to mess up so he can condemn you to burn forever, right? That I don't believe. But I do believe that we came from the source of the divine, and that we will return to the source of the divine. That it is a never-ending cycle, and I believe that being here is by his direct express will. That I, the individualized piece that resides in this 5D temple, was specifically selected out for this incarnation, for this body. You were selected for yours. And that the primeval mover, the thing that sets everything into motion, was God, the Holy Spirit, right? Now, whether he said, become, to be, let there be light, whatever it is, that is up for debate and will remain up for debate. I will not ever be firm on that particular thing. The universe appears to be expanding. That could be because of random chance, doubtful, highly unlikely, or it could be because God said bang, right? Let there be, and there was, and everything moved. That does not necessitate that there is contained in every element some creature just moving it around, or contained in the sun some invisible thing that is moving it around, or contained in the earth some invisible creature who is moving it around. I mean, there's a difference there. The primeval movement is the Holy Spirit, to me, But that is also everything in existence, right? The Holy Spirit is literally every atom, all at the same time. And if you were to freeze time, then that would be inactive Holy Spirit. But every single second that is moving forward is literally the Holy Spirit in motion. It is every atom in its rotation, every compound in its rotation, every planet in its rotation, every solar system and its rotation. Everything is rotating, everything is moving, everything is vibrating. There is no real solidity to anything. And so I believe that God started physics, but that not necessarily that there is a elemental creature residing within that creation who is making it happen. God made that happen without that creature. Back to the text. That substance must be the soul and spirit. Those are two different things. The synthesis and the seventh principle of the manifested cosmos, and to serve as a spiritual upadi to this, there must be a sixth, its vehicle, primordial physical matter. Now, there only needs to be three. What is the Trinity? How many times have we talked about the Trinity? You have the temple of God, the 5D navigation device. You have the individualized slice of divinity, which is you making the decisions for the temple. And then you have the Holy Spirit, which allows everything to happen. It is the part that changes, I decide I want to wiggle my fingers, into the actual wiggling happening. So, the substance must be the soul and spirit. Those are two different things. And yes, it must contain soul and spirit, but that doesn't mean that it is... You know what I'm saying here? All right. The synthesis and the seventh principle of the manifested cosmos, and to serve as a spiritual upadi to this, there must be the sixth, its vehicle, primordial physical matter, so to speak. Though its nature must escape forever our limited normal senses. It is easy for an astronomer, if endowed with an imaginative faculty, to build a theory of the emergence of the universe out of chaos by simply applying to it the principles of mechanics. But such a universe will always prove, with respect to its scientific human creator, a Frankenstein's monster. It will lead him into endless perplexities. The application of the mechanical laws only can never carry the speculator beyond the objective world, nor will it unveil to men the origin and final destiny of cosmos. This is whither the nebular theory has led science. In sober fact and truth, this theory is twin sister to that of ether, and both are the offsprings of necessity. One as indispensable to account for the transmission of light as the other to explain the problem of the origin of the solar systems. The question with them is how the same homogeneous matter, footnote, had astronomers held simply in their present state of knowledge to the hypothesis of Laplace, which was simply the formation of the planetary system, it might, in time, have resulted in something like an approximate truth. But the two parts of the general problem, that of the formation of the universe, or the formation of the sun and stars from the primitive matter, and then the development of the planets around their sun, rest on quite different facts in nature and are even so viewed by science itself. They are at the opposite poles of being. All right. The question with them is how the same homogeneous matter could, obeying the laws of Newton, give birth to bodies, sun, planets, and their satellites, subject to conditions of identity of motion and formed of such heterogeneous elements. Has the nebular theory helped to solve the problem, even if applied solely to bodies considered as inanimate and material? We say most decidedly not. What progress has it made since 1811, when Sir W. Herschel's paper, first presenting facts based on observation and showing the existence of nebular matter, made the sons of the Royal Society shout for joy? Since then, a still greater discovery has permitted, through spectrum analysis, the verification and corroboration of Sir W. Herschel's conjecture. Laplace demanded some kind of primitive world stuff to prove the idea of progressive world evolution and growth. Here it is, as offered 2 millennia ago. To me, this world stuff is elements, right? There are elements in space. I know people think it's a vacuum. It's not really, right? An absolute vacuum is not a possibility. It would suck away our atmosphere. Our gravity would not hold it. Don't get that in your head. But instead, what we see is those elements are stretched. They are beyond their normal bounds. If it was normally atom of helium was my fist, right? Instead of being like this, instead it's like this, or even like this. It is spread thin. And so it doesn't behave in the same ways that the compression that happens here makes it look. And so those things exist in space. There is oxygen in space, carbon, nitrogen, helium, hydrogen, uranium. Like all of the elements exist out there, spread and stretched thin. At some point, ionics had a part to play. Right? Now, whether that was a discharge from the sun, energizing our core and starting the collective process, or whether that was an ejection from the sun or whatever, like those things are up for debate. But whether there is this primal, primitive world stuff, there is. Right now in space, those elements are present. They are disjointed because our gravitational forces have collected a whole bunch of them here in this planet, and in Jupiter and Mars and all of the other planets in our solar system. And so it stretched all of this stuff that didn't get accumulated to a great degree. Those things are held in space and away from our gravitation by ionic bonds. And it is entirely probable, if not provable, that at some point there was a collection of these elements and there was an energetic investment. Where they came from is up for debate, but it is probable that it is extrasolar, even if it was delivered from the solar system, right? Even if the sun was the application device, the energy came from somewhere else. But that began our accretion here, was that energetic investment into this nebular gas. It created the first collection, and that started all of it together. All of that to say that there is world stuff, right? The world stuff, now nebulae, was known from the highest antiquity. Anaxagoras taught that, having differentiated, the subsequent commixture of heterogeneous substances remained motionless and unorganized, until finally the mind, the collective body of dying Kohans, we say, began to work upon and communicated to it motion and order. Aristotle's Physica. The theory is now taken up in its first portion, that of any mind interfering with it being rejected. Spectrum analysis reveals the existence of nebulae formed entirely of gases and luminous vapors. Is this the primitive nebular matter? The spectra reveal, it is said, the physical conditions of the matter which emits cosmic light. The spectra of the resolvable and the irresolvable nebulae are shown to be entirely different, the spectra of the latter showing their physical state to be that of a glowing gas or vapor. The bright lines of one nebula reveal the existence of hydrogen in it, and of other material substances known and unknown. The same in the atmosphere of the sun and stars. This leads to the direct inference that a star is formed by the condensation of a nebula. Hence, that even the metals themselves on Earth are formed owing to the condensation of hydrogen or some other primitive matter, some ancestral cousin to helium perhaps, or some yet unknown stuff. This does not clash with the occult teachings. And this is the problem that chemistry is trying to solve, and it must succeed sooner or later in the task, accepting Nolan Boland's when it does, the esoteric teaching. But when this does happen, it will kill the nebular theory as it now stands. Meanwhile, astronomy cannot accept in any way, if it is to be regarded as an exact science, the present theory of the filiation of stars, even if occultism does so in its own way, as it explains this filiation differently, because astronomy has not one single physical datum to show for it. Astronomy could anticipate chemistry in proving the existence of the fact if it could show a planetary nebula exhibiting a spectrum of 3 or 4 bright lines, gradually condensing and transforming into a star, with the spectrum all covered with a number of dark lines. But the question of the variability of the nebula, even as to their form, is yet one of the mysteries of astronomy. The data of observation possessed so far are of too recent an origin, too uncertain, to permit us to affirm anything. Cosmogonical hypotheses of Wolf. Since the discovery of the spectroscope, its magic power has revealed to its adepts only one single transformation of a star of this kind, and even that showed directly the reverse of what is needed as proof in favor of the nebular theory, namely, a star transforming itself into a planetary nebula, as told in the observatory. The temporary star which appeared in the constellation Cygnus in November of 1876, discovered by J.F.J. Schmidt, exhibited a spectrum broken by very brilliant lines. Gradually, the continuous spectrum and most of the lines disappeared, leaving, finally, one single vibrant line, which appeared to coincide with the green line of the nebula. Though this metamorphosis is not irreconcilable with the hypotheses of the nebular origin of the stars, nevertheless, this single solitary case rests on no observation whatever, least of all on direct observation. The occurrence may have been due to several other causes. Since astronomers are inclined to think our planets are tending towards precipitation on the sun, why should not that star have blazed out owing to a collision of such precipitated planets? Or, as many suggest, the applause of a comet, a pulse of a comet. Anyhow, the only known instance of a star transformation since 1811 is not favorable to the nebular theory. Moreover, on the question of this theory, as in all others, astronomers disagree. In our own age, it was Buffon, before Laplace ever thought of it, who, very much struck by the identity of motion in the planets, was the first to propose the hypotheses of the planets and their satellites originating in the bosom of the sun. Forthwith, and for the purpose, he invented a special comet, supposed to have torn out, by a powerful oblique blow, the quantity of matter necessary to their formation. Laplace gave its dues to the comet in his Exposition du Système du Monde. But the idea was seized and even improved upon by a conception of the alternate evolution from the sun's central mass of the planets, apparently without weight or influence on the motion of the visible planets, and as evidently without any more existence than the likeness of Moses in the moon. But the modern theory is also a variation on the systems elaborated by Kant and Laplace. The idea of both was that, at the origin of things, all the matter which now enters into the composition of the planetary bodies was spread all over the space comprised in the solar system, and even beyond. It was a nebula of extremely small density, whose condensation gradually gave birth, by a mechanism that has hitherto never been explained, to the various bodies of our system. This is the original nebular theory, an incomplete yet faithful repetition, a short chapter out of the large volume of universal esoteric cosmogony of the teachings in the secret doctrine. And both systems, Kant's and Laplace's, differ greatly from the modern theory, redundant with conflicting sub-theories and fanciful hypotheses. The essence of cometary matter and of that which composes the stars is totally different from any of the chemical or physical characteristics with which Western science is now acquainted. While the spectroscope has shown the probable similarity, owing to the chemical action of terrestrial light on the intercepted rays, of earthly and sidereal substance, the chemical actions peculiar to the variously progressed orbs of space have not been detected, nor proved to be identical with those observed on our own planets, say the teachers. Mr. Crookes says almost the same in the fragment quoted from his lecture, Elements and Meta-Elements. At the utmost, observes Seawolf, footnote, member of the Institute, astronomer of the Observatory, Paris, Cosmogonical Hypotheses. At the utmost, observes Seawolf, could the nebular hypothesis show in its favor with W. Herschel the existence of planetary nebulae in various degrees of condensation, and of spiral nebulae with nuclei of condensation on the branches and the center. Footnote 2. But the spectra of those nebulae have never yet been ascertained. When they are found with bright lines, then only may they be sighted. But, in fact, the knowledge of the bond that unites the nebulae to the stars is yet denied to us. We did not know about ionization. And lacking, as we do, direct observation, we are even debarred from establishing it even on the analogy of chemical composition. The light that you see in the nebula is the nebula becoming accreted. It is evident that, even if the men of science, leaving aside the difficulty arising for them out of such undeniable variety and heterogeneity of matter in the constitution of nebula, did admit, with the ancients, that the origin of all the visible and invisible heavenly bodies must be sought for in one primordial homogeneous world stuff, in a kind of pre-protyle. And see, the problem is that the world stuff is not homogeneous, right? It is heterogeneous. It is many different things in close approximation with each other. And carbon and hydrogen don't bond all that easily, so they're out there existing next to each other without forming bonds. But other things do bond more easily. And so when the energetic source is introduced, they begin the accretion process. And then, as they create voids, the other elements find things that they can ionize with, and that compounds the accretion. The lens of history really does give us much better. Alright, there was a footnote on pre-protyle. Mr. Crookes' protyle must not be regarded as the primary stuff out of which the Dayan Kohans, in accordance with the immutable laws of nature, wove our solar system. This protyle cannot even be the first prima materia of Kant, which that great mind saw used up in the formation of the worlds, and thus existing no longer in a diffuse state. It is a mediate phase in the progressive differentiation of cosmic substance from its normal undifferentiated state. Protyle is, then, the aspect assumed by matter in the middle passage into full objectivity. It is evident that this would not put an end to their perplexities, unless they admit, also, that our actual visible universe is merely the Satula Sharira, the gross body, of the sevenfold cosmos. They will have to face another problem, especially if they risk maintaining that it is now visible bodies are the result of the condensation of that one and single primordial matter. for mere observation shows them that the actions which produce the actual universe are far more complex than could ever be embraced in that theory. First of all, there are two distinct classes of irresolvable nebulae, as science itself teaches. The telescope is unable to distinguish between the two, but the spectroscope can, and notices, therefore, an essential difference between their physical constitutions. Footnote 2. The question of the resolvability of the nebulae has often been presented in too affirmative a manner and quite contrary to the ideas expressed by the illustrious experimenter with the spectra of these constellations, Mr. Huggins. Every nebula whose spectrum contains only bright lines is gaseous, it is said, and hence is irresolvable. Every nebula with a continuous spectrum must end by resolving into stars with an instrument of sufficient power. This assumption is contrary at once to the results obtained and to the spectroscopic theory. The Lyra Nebula, the Dumbbell Nebula, the central region of the Nebula of Orion appear resolvable and show a spectrum of bright lines. The nebula of Canis Venatici is not resolvable and gives a continuous spectrum. Because, indeed, the spectroscope informs us of the physical state of the constituent matter of the stars, but affords us no notions of their modes of aggregation. A nebula formed of gaseous globes, or even of nuclei, faintly luminous, surrounded by a powerful atmosphere, would give a spectrum of lines and still be resolvable. Such seems to be the state of Huygens' region in the Orion Nebula. A nebula formed of solid or fluidic particles in a state of incandescence. A true cloud will give a continuous spectrum, but will be irresolvable. See Wolf, Cosmogonical Hypotheses. Some of these, Wolf tells us, have a spectrum of 3 or 4 bright lines, others a continuous spectrum. The first are gaseous, the others formed of pulverulent matter. The former must constitute a veritable atmosphere. It is among these that the solar nebula of Laplace has to be placed. The latter form an ensemble of particles that may be considered as independent, and the rotation of which obeys the laws of internal weight. Such are the nebulae adopted by Kant and Faye. Observation allows us to place the one, as the other, at the very origin of the planetary world. But when we try to go beyond and ascend to the primitive chaos which has produced the totality of the heavenly bodies, we have first to account for the actual existence of these two classes of nebulae. If the primitive chaos were a cold, luminous gas, footnote, see stanza 3 about light or the cold flame, and commentary number 8 where it is explained that the mother, chaos, is a cold fire, a cool radiance, colorless, formless, devoid of every quality. Motion is the one eternal is, and contains the potentialities of every quality in the manvanteric worlds. It is said, motion is the Holy Spirit in action. If the primitive chaos were a cold luminous gas, one could understand how the contraction resulting from attraction could have heated it and made it luminous. We have to explain the condensation of this gas to the state of incandescent particles, the presence of which is revealed to us in certain nebulae by the spectroscope. If the original chaos was composed of such particles, how did certain of their portions pass into the gaseous state, while others have preserved their primitive conditions? And once again, we are brought back to ionic bonds. Such is the synopsis of the objections and difficulties to the acceptance of the nebular theory brought forward by the French savant, who concludes his interesting chapter by declaring that the first part of the cosmogonical problem, what is the primitive matter of chaos, and how did that matter give birth to the sun and stars, there remains to this day in the domain of romance and of mere imagination. Footnote 2. Hypotheses Cosmogonics. If this is the last word of science upon that subject, whither then would one turn in order to learn what the nebular theory is supposed to teach? What, in fact, is this theory? What it is, no one seems to know for a certainty. What it is not, we learn from the erudite author of World Life. He tells us that 1. It is not a theory of the evolution of the universe, but only a primarily and genetic explanation of the phenomena of the solar system, and accessorily a coordination of the principal phenomena in the stellar and nebular firmament as far as human vision has been able to penetrate. So it is not first cause, it is the result of that first cause. 2. That it does not regard the comets as involved in that particular evolution which has produced the solar system. Esoteric doctrine does, as does science nowadays. It does because it too recognizes the comets as forms of cosmic existence, coordinated with earlier stages of nebular evolution, and it actually assigns to them, chiefly, the formation of all worlds. The comets are an interesting case, right? What is most likely that happened there? You have different densities of things, right? And if you have an accretion inside of a lighter density, suppose, for instance, that space was liquid, it was water, and inside of that, somehow through ionic bonds, accumulated something buoyant, right? What would happen? Well, it would shoot up, right? Suppose that one of these nebula out in space had a density that was lighter than something that had accumulated within it, and there was an attractive force present or an energetic investment made, which would be a transfer of energy from somewhere to there, and it acted as a catalyst to kind of shoot it out of that gas. That is my supposition of what has happened, right? That the iron, which is primarily what comets are made of, accumulated inside of something that was probably magnetic, right? There was a magnetic charge to the gas, and that magnetic charge was contrary to the magnetic charge of the accumulated iron, and therefore the polarities did not match, and the gas, being larger and less movable, shot this solid out. That's my speculation. It is purely speculation. Take from it what you will, but it fits with the nebular theory. 3. That it does not deny an antecedent history of luminous fire mist, the secondary stage of evolution in the secret doctrine. It makes no claim to having reached an absolute beginning, and even it allows that this fire mist may have previously existed in a cold, non-luminous, and invisible condition. 4. And that finally, it does not profess to discover the origin of things, but only a stadium in material history, leaving the philosopher and theologian as free as they ever were to seek for the origin of the modes of being. Footnote. World Life, page 196. But this is not all. Even the greatest philosopher of England, Mr. Herbert Spencer, arrayed himself against the fantastic theory by saying that A. The problem of existence is not resolved by it. Okay. B. The nebular hypothesis throws no light upon the origin of diffused matter. And C. That the nebular hypothesis, as it now stands, implies a first cause. That is true. Footnote 2 is Westminster Review, 20. The latter, we are afraid, is more than our modern physicists have bargained for. Thus, it seems that the poor hypothesis can hardly expect to find help or corroboration even in the world of the metaphysicians. Considering all this, the occultists believe that they have a right to present their philosophy, however misunderstood and ostracized it may be at present. and they maintain that this failure of the scientists to discover the truth is entirely due to their materialism and contempt for transcendental sciences. Yet, although the scientific minds in our century are as far from the true and correct doctrine of evolution as ever, there may be still some hope left for the future, as we find another great scientist giving us a faint glimmer of it. In an article in Popular Science Review on recent researches in minute life, we find Mr. H.J. Slack, FCS, Sec RMS, saying, "There is an evident convergence of all sciences, from physics to chemistry and physiology, towards some doctrine of evolution and development, of which the facts of Darwinism will form part, and what ultimate aspect this doctrine will take, there is little, if any, evidence to show, and perhaps it will not be shaped by the human mind until metaphysical as well as physical inquiries are much more advanced." This is a happy forecast indeed. The day may come, then, when the natural selection, as taught by Mr. Darwin and Herbert Spencer, will form only a part in its ultimate modification of our Eastern doctrine of evolution, which will be Manu and Kapila, esoterically explained. And that is going to bring us to the end of the Modern Nebular Theory. Hopefully I brought a little bit of enlightenment and not too much confusion to some somewhat difficult topics. I understand I hold some unconventional beliefs, and I have a tendency to step on toes when I relay those. It is not intentional, but it is not something I apologize for. I am here to try to separate, right? I try to keep speculation clear, right? And even if it is not my speculation, but especially my speculation, I try to keep clear because it is important, right? If someone believes that this thing is, then they won't look at other ideas. There are many things that I believe are emphatically true, and yet I propose them as speculation because they cannot be proven to be so. The comets, for one, right? The existence of God, for another. I do believe in a prime originator. I believe that we are here at the direct will of God, and whether that is that everything was created exactly like it is and set in motion at the start, or whether it was a compressed point and God said bang, and it imparted the motion that allowed the universe to be. Doesn't even matter to me. It really doesn't. That is not something we are going to prove. I don't care how good we get in science, at least in my lifetime, we're not going to prove that. And so I am perfectly fine with wherever the speculation leads, as long as it is identified as speculation. The nebular theory has been adjusted many times since 1888. It is still the prevailing theory for the reasons that we have talked about, right? That atoms exist, ionic bonds exist. All of these things are provable, right? Those things are provable. These things do exist. They have mass. Even a gas has mass. Even the atmosphere has weight. 32 millibars per inch at sea level, right? We have this. And so we need to base our firm beliefs upon things that can be proven and maintain speculation where it belongs. Hopefully I've been clear about what I believe and the speculations that I hold, and differentiating that from things that are provably true. If you like what I'm doing over here, let me know down below. Give me a like, a share, a follow, throw me a comment if you agree or disagree with anything that was stated here. Drop it in the comments, and if it remains respectful, it gets to remain up. If there is another work you would like to see discussed in the manner that we are doing here, drop that in the comments as well. And if you really like what I'm doing, hit me with that super thanks or even a membership. It will be greatly appreciated. To the crew, thanks for hanging out. I appreciate every single minute that you are here with me, and I am praying for you every single day. Until next time, I love you. God loves you. You are perfect, whole, and complete, just the way that you are. And this has been Pitt's Take. Peace.